Hi and welcome to another video where I'm going to be looking at the glutes and the several roles that they play and why many of the exercise people use are not as effective as they could be because they only really look at one role and not all three. So I'm going to look at a very simple exercise being the bridge or hip extension. We've got Nathan here, he's got a band on his legs to help him. And he's just basically going to run through a couple of versions here. And I'm going to also explain why I don't feel like there's a need to use a barbell on your hips where I see all the time. I don't really think that it's entirely necessary. You can get a lot out of just doing it with your own body weight and with a band like this. And you'll see Nathan here is demonstrating poor form, all right? So as he comes up, he's got good control, but as he comes down, he loses control. And I see this all too often where people can squeeze their butts on the concentric version or phase of the movement, but lose it eccentrically. And I don't think that's a lack of strength, it's just a lack of awareness and understanding of how it moves. You see Nathan here is now demonstrating what it looks like when it's handled in control both ways. So that's one of the roles of the glutes, is the hip extension. All right. So if you imagine he's standing up then as well, that's when you're like for squats and deadlifts. So if you're in that position, that's where the hips are driving forward. All right. So we're sort of squeezing together to come up. All right. So we've just got him horizontally doing the same thing. So horizontally just takes a bit of the quads out of it, and really puts a lot more emphasis into the glutes. But it's only one of the roles of the glutes that it plays in, which really is very important for helping the ball of the hip, the femur, to sort of sit back into the hip socket. That's why hip extension is very important for people with hip problems and a very good exercise for it. But like I said, it's only one part of the puzzle, so you really need to be looking at other roles that the glutes may be playing. So one of the other roles that it plays is the abduction, which is like moving your hip out to the side. And one of the easiest exercises to encourage that is going to be the clam exercise, which we'll get Nathan to show us now. So this is where he's again with the band. Without the band, I find this exercise pretty useless. You really need some resistance there to encourage the good for the activation of the muscle. And again, there's a couple of mistakes that can be made with, even though it's such an easy exercise, very low in skill. We still see a lot of compensation and cheating. You'll see where people moving around way too much. And you could blame it on the core, or you could sort of say, well, the body's looking for something to help because it just doesn't have the strength to do it. So, you might be getting yourself to put your hand on your butt like Nathan is there to make yourself aware of where you should be working from. I like to put my hand on the ground and create stiffness through that upper body and really tell that person not to move that upper body at all, and just feel that the hip is being abducted by the glutes. All right, so this is the second role that the glutes are playing that is different to extension that we just saw on the previous one. So it's got a role of playing in the extension, but it also needs to do abduction. All right, so if you're always just doing hip extensions with a heavy barbell on you, you may not be working the middle and anterior fibres, which really work the abduction, where the posterior ones are doing the hip extension. All right. Way I'd like to do this is I prefer to do the abduction first. If I'm working with someone who I want to activate it, really get them to be aware, I'll work on the abduction first, and then I'll follow it straight up with the extension. And trust me, if you do like 20 reps of the clam exercise followed up by 10 to 15 of the hip extension, you will feel your glutes. All right. There's no need to add any resistance to this because the time under tension will force them to kick in. All right. Now, what's the third one, you might be thinking? Well, the third one is when we actually just standing on one leg. All right. So the glute medius is really heavily involved just from standing on one leg. And to be honest, this is when we start to see the extension and abduction used at the same time. And this is where, again, you'll see those posterior fibres kick in when he's having to get into this position here. Because it has to drive the head of that femur back into the hip socket for him to be able to bend over. If it doesn't, he'll just get a huge pinch at the front of the hip that'll stop him from bending. You'll probably feel it already, way back before then. You'll probably feel it right at about that point. That's when they'll feel a pinch at the front there, and that's because their femur is not being driven back into the socket as he's bending. All right, so this is where the posterior fibres are pulling it back in. This is why it's such a good exercise for hip problems. But you can sort of see in a static position, his glutes are also working in abduction like we saw with the clam, because they're trying to maintain the alignment of the leg. So he has abduction and extension happening at the same time, and then the anterior fibres are also trying to start to work in providing the necessary forces that would allow, if he was walking, that the other leg to start to come forward. So when he stands up, when he comes up to standing up here, the glutes actually start to pull forward so that this leg can move forward into the stance. So it has that's why it has the single leg stuff is so important, and I would spend most of my time here with most people because I'm going to get the biggest bang for my buck by working all of the fibres at once. All right, and that's where sometimes people get obsessed with these hip extensions with heavy barbells, but really they're missing out on the other part of how the glutes function. All right, so I thought this is a good video to sort of explain how it's sort of pulled apart and then put back together more or less. All right, so yeah, I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'll see you on our next one.